So we're delighted to see you all here this evening, and particularly delighted to welcome Harvey to give our program tonight. Many of you know Harvey from his musical performances at Westminster, also for his inspired leadership as the founder of the Peace Drums Project. I was looking at a little bit of information that said that was 2012, Harvey. That's
We're in our
quite
second
some time
decade.
ago. Yeah, yeah. With the idea that using music to bring people together, particularly young people, sometimes across chasms of various makings, in this case, Jewish and Palestinian youth. Harvey, I think, had planned to be in that part of the world recently, but the events that have been occurring um, meant that that trip had to be postponed. So we hope that you're able to undertake that again before too very long. So Harvey is retired, I believe, as an associate professor of music at the University of Delaware. So a Renaissance man,
There
many
you go.
talents, and and we are delighted to have you here this evening. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask each of you to mute yourselves, if you would, so that your dog or cat or your coughing fit doesn't place you center stage on the recording. I'm still letting some folks in. And let me spotlight Harvey and turn this program over to him. Um, as you know, there has been a great deal in the news in recent times about what's happening in Israel, what's happening in the United States when it comes to issues of anti-Semitism. And so questions arise as to how we address or deal with the points of intersection. And so we've asked Harvey, who's graciously agreed to share his thoughts with us this evening. So without further ado, Harvey, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sue. And we are going to Israel on August 23rd for August 23rd through September 2nd to meet with the kids. We were supposed to be there last week for our first festival where kids from the West Bank and kids from Israel were going to get together and play music together. So that was postponed. We'll do that. We'll do that program sometime later this year or early next year because the place that we can do that is at the Dead Sea, but it's just too hot in August to do a program at the Dead Sea. So we'll go in August. We'll work with the groups individually and prep for later in the year. So thanks for having me. This is a very interesting topic, especially. Are there any other people of the Jewish faith on this call? Are you all Christian? Are there any Muslims on this call? If not, that's fine. This is a very interesting topic to talk about to both Jews and non-Jews alike. And was up in the Adirondack Mountains last week, and I was with two other couples who were Jewish, and I said that I was going to be addressing this group about anti-Semitism, and the conversations are always different talking to American Jews, let alone Israeli Jews, than talking to Christians. My wife is not Jewish, so we have great conversations about this. So I wanted to talk a little, and the anti-Semitism is something that I've really thought of a lot about recently. And I'll tell you why. A little history of my growing up. Um, I grew up in Philadelphia around Second and Cheltenham, which is called East Oak Lane, for want of a better term, in a completely Jewish enclave. There was not a single Christmas light during Christmas time in my neighborhood. It was basically like a shtetl in from Poland, but it was a middle class, a lower middle class row house community in Philadelphia, and we were surrounded by we were on the edge of the only section of Philadelphia. And if you're from Philadelphia, you would know that the only section during the 30s, the only rifle club was the headquarters for the American Nazi Party, for the Nazi Bund. So a lot of our neighbors, right outside of our neighborhood, were sons and brothers and daughters and cousins and uncles of previous people of the American Nazi Party. And in addition, there was a huge Catholic community on the in Olney, which grew up in the doctrine of pre-Second Vatican Council. So the Jews killed Christ, so it's okay to pick fights with Jews. So my growing up had intense anti-Semitism. Of course, we called it, anti-Jewishness. So I'll be 70 years old in January. So my generation were often children of Holocaust survivors. I wasn't. My parents were neither my parents nor my grandparents on either side were affected directly by the Holocaust, but there is a strain of my family that doesn't exist because of the Holocaust. So growing up as a Jew in America, anti-Semitism was just a given. I mean, it was not a big deal. You fought all the time, like physically fought because you were Jewish. It was a question that got thrown at you a lot if you were in the wrong neighborhood, or you were at the wrong bowling alley, or you were on the wrong playground. And I can remember many nights growing up where kids would come into the neighborhood and pick fights because we were Jewish and they weren't. And that was just like, believe it or not, like when you're 10 or 11 years old, and I left my neighborhood when I was 19, it was just a fact of life. I don't know how any other way to put it. And it was very interesting because um, today's anti-Semitism to me is way more mild than the anti-Semitism I grew up with. And I kind of take issue with this incredible, hand wringing and flag waving of anti-Semitism that seemed, for sure that, a firebombing of a synagogue and killing people on the street because they're Jewish, you know, I get it. Like that's horrible and it's anti-Semitic or anti-Israel or anti-Zionism or whatever way you want to call it. But from the anti-Semitism that I grew up with, um, I never had any roadblocks in my background being Jewish. Um, I don't know that it helped. I don't know that it hurt. It was just, my generation of Jews that from my neighborhood, all of them, they were all Jewish, all were very, very successful financially. I wasn't because I was a musician, but that's a different story. But everyone else became doctors and real estate people, and they have way more money than their parents or grandparents ever had. And they weren't blocked because they were Jewish, right? So the idea of anti-Semitism and the idea that Jews in America, Jews around the world, are being targeted for being Jewish is something that I have a hard time with, as opposed to being targeted because they're they're considered to be sympathetic to Israel. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Like is anti-Israelism anti-Semitism? There's a big article today in the New York Times, an interview between Ross Douthat and Bret Stephens. Bret Stephens is a big proponent that anti-Semitism is on the rise and it's evil, and we're in a new, 1930s Germany mode. I don't happen to agree with it, but so there's in the Jewish community there's this real balance, and it really came to a head on October 7th, and October 7th, 2023, um, made the Jewish community turn around and say, you're either with us or you're against us. And most of the American Jews that said that really have no idea about the history of Gaza or the West Bank or even Israel, other than the fact that it was founded in 1948 as a safe haven for the Jews, and that's that. Um, I'm fortunate enough to work in Israel in a project that works with Muslims and Christians and people in the West Bank, and so I have a little bit more knowledge about it. So people my age, sort of the middle of the baby boom, Jews my age, grew up with a pre Six Day War mentality and a post Six Day War mentality. So the Six Day War, uh, happened, and we we went from being like I never walked around Philadelphia with a Star of David, or a kippah. Well, I wasn't religious, but I would never tell the world, "Hey, I'm Jewish," even though I had dark hair and dark eyes. Right? That was like, "Oh, you must be Jewish. Let's fight." So, but I never would advertise it, and I didn't advertise it because I knew that would cause a fight. When Israel won the Six Day War, a lot of Jews went from being the victim to the victor. And if you, I guess I was like 12 or 13 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old. When that happened, it was a real sea change for my generation of Jews, which is pretty much the bulk of American Judaism, just because it was such a big bump in the baby boom generation. And it became something to be proud of, right? Like wow, Israel's this really, incredible force. And, we knew about it, but we didn't really know that much about it. But now it's thrust into this, they defeated 5 Arab armies, blah, 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 blah. And there's since been many books written about the Six Day War and was it really the miracle that they claim? Um, and that cha cha turned a lot of people, and especially in my generation, to become super pro-Israel. So before it was like, well, there's this thing called Israel, and we have these tins. When I was going to Hebrew school and Sunday school, they looked like Band-Aid tins, but it was by the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, and you would put coins in them, and every week you went and okay, don't forget to put coins in the what they called the tzedakah box, which was for the Jewish National Fund, which basically went towards buying up Arab lands in in the Middle East. It was like, okay, we put money in the box. That's what we knew about Israel until the Six Day War. And the other thing that grew out of that was a very, very strong militarism about being Jewish, right? So, again, like if you're 8, 9, 10, 11, up to 16 years old, 17 years old, and you're always getting into fights with non-Jews because you're Jewish, the way around it is to form paramilitary groups. And one on the East Coast was founded by Rabbi Meir Kahan. I don't know if any of you know about Meir Kahan, but he was a Brooklyn rabbi who is extremely influential in today's right-wing government in Israel, and he formed the JDL, or the Jewish Defense League, and it was initially formed to walk Jews to synagogue in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, to protect them, much like the guardian angels in New York. So the Jews had their own guardian angels called the Jewish Defense League, and Meir Kahan was was a nut job who was declared a terrorist by the United States government, and he was assassinated back in the 80s, I think. I forget. But in today's Israeli government, in the right-wing government of Netanyahu, you have Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and they're Kahanists. He has his own brand of toxic religion called Kahanists, and most of the terrorist acts that have been perpetrated in Israel, including the slaughtering of 29 30 Muslims in prayer at the tomb of the patriarchs, was committed by a Kahanist. So, this was, and I can remember being in my neighborhood and having members of the JDL come and recruit you for a summer camp of self-defense. Like, come to our summer camp and learn karate and jujitsu and how to defend yourself against, the anti-Semitic hordes that are in the United States. And so, which I never did. I always felt like that was kind of a silly thing to do. But many, many people in my neighborhood and many people that I knew in Philadelphia, fell in with the JDL. Um, and they did some interesting things, like they protested, like if Aeroflot flew a plane from Moscow to JFK, they would like they would protest that Jews weren't allowed out of Russia, in the 70s, right? Like that was a truly anti-Semitic government in the Soviet Union. But the Kahanists, Rabbi Meir Kahan, preached military solutions to the anti-Semitic problems in the United States, and particularly to the Arab population in Israel. And there's probably no bigger gulf than anti-Semitism in the United States and the Arab population in Israel, like in the Middle East, in Palestine, or they, I can't think of two more disparate groups. So the the growing up with this flip in looking at Israel as a place that you stuck money in a little tin, to being, the badass guys in the neighborhood, and created, a real a real generation or two or three of super pro-Israel Americans, Israel right or wrong, and militant Americans. A lot of Americans, people that I knew, moved to Israel, joined the army, are still there in Israel, and it became Jewish and Israel became one and the same. And I think that's really important to understand that your your Jewishness, one's Jewishness in the United States, is tied in to Israel, and that whatever Israel does affects your sense of being Jewish, and whatever propaganda you were told as a youngster or as a young adult or even an adult, if it came out of Israel, it was something that you believed. And um, I certainly am guilty of that. I didn't really start to understand the bigger picture, um, until I started doing peace drums. Regardless of how much Bob Stoddard tried to school me on things, it wasn't until I started working there that I really got the idea that, well, there's a different narrative than what I've been told. Um, so all this plays into the perception of of American and I'm going to call it American anti-Semitism, because I think it's different than a European brand of anti-Semitism. It's much older in Europe than it is in the United States. I mean, it's part of the fabric of a lot of those societies. But American anti-Semitism um, is a is rooted in, you know all of the otherness that ignorance likes to perpetuate. But there's also the anti-Semitism that is anti-Israelism, anti-Israeli government. And what I tell my Jewish friends is if you're going to have a tank roll into Gaza and blast apart a bunch of tents, and on the side of that tank is the Star of David, which is the symbol of the Jewish people for 5,000 years, you're not going to have happy people. Like, are you, is your identity that the symbol that's on the tank, or is your identity something else? And that's a hard thing for American Jews to swallow. And if there were Jews on this call, American Jews, they would already be they already have hung up because this is not something that people want to hear or even think about. And if you read this editorial or this interview today in the Times, Brett Stevens is the embodiment of yes, it's bad, but yes, 10,000 kids are killed, but and how can people not be anti-Israel slash anti-Semitic? I don't know. That's it. It is one. Israel is Judaism. Judaism is Israel, according to most American Jews. Not according to me, but according to most American Jews, because Israel's been sold as the only safe place for Jews in the world. When the shit hits the fan once again with a Holocaust, blah blah blah. So one other thing I'm going to say is when I was 16 years old, I spent a summer in Israel. My parents sent me as part of a. This was pre-birthright stuff. Does everyone know what birthright is? Does anyone not know what birthright is? Okay, so I'll explain birthright. This is pre-birthright. So I went as part of a, American Jewish kid working on a kibbutz, a collective farm. I was there all summer. It was great fun. It was, God, an adventure. Israel was way different in 1972 than it was than it was today. And but the one thing I remember about that trip, there are many things but the one thing I remember is how many times Israelis asked when I was going to move to Israel, or what's called Aliyah. When are you making Aliyah? When are you moving? Now I'm 16. I'm a white Jewish middle class kid with my own Mustang living in Philadelphia. Why would I want to move to Israel with a bunch of chicken farms? And are you crazy? I'm living the life in the United States. Even though, okay, so I'm Jewish, I get into fights, but come on. I don't have to join the army. The draft has been disbanded by Richard Nixon. I don't have to carry a gun. So that was a really interesting time to be there. That movement of sending Jewish kids to Israel to experience Israeli society over the decades has morphed into something called birthright. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It is your right as a Jew to move to Israel whenever you want, right? So I can be from anywhere in the world, and because I'm Jewish, I have automatic citizenship in Israel, which doesn't play too well with the local Palestinian population, as you can imagine. And the birthright movement is super well funded. It used to be funded by by a stock fund that was run by Bernie Madoff, and you know what happened to that fund. And then they were going to go out of business, and the Sheldon Adelson family, if you don't know that name, you could look it up. Sheldon Adelson family took it over, and they write a single check every year to send kids scot-free for 10 days, as many Jewish kids that want to do this, and it's, I think it's between the ages of, it's like from 15 to 26 or 27 years old. And the idea is, it's a huge propaganda thing, is to send Jewish kids to Israel, hopefully find an Israeli wife or husband, move to Israel, and have more Jewish population on the land. It's a bit insidious. I mean, I find it like whenever I travel to Israel, I'm always on a plane or coming home with a bunch of birthright kids, and it's I don't know what to say to them. They're so entitled, and they come from really lots of wealthy backgrounds, and they're all wearing IDF t-shirts, and they're wearing, Israel gear, and they're just talking about what a great time they had, and they never experience the West Bank, or Palestinians. Although there is a movement in Birthright now called, If Not Now, When? And they're Birthright kids that go, and then in the middle of the Birthright trip, start to preach, hey, there's this Palestinian population. And of course, they're immediately sent home. So it's a very interesting phenomenon, Birthright. Um, and it's a huge propaganda thing. And it just ties American Jews closer to Israel. I'm pretty sure there's a version in Europe, but the population there is so much smaller. There is one in England, but that's also a small population. So, my my view of anti-Semitism today is okay. There's people, regardless of the terror, the bombing of the synagogue or the shooting of the synagogue in Pittsburgh. Yeah, but it's no different than Dylan Roof shooting up Black Church in Charlotte. I mean, this is the way extremists react these days by mass killings and gun violence, and it's just part of American society. There's always been anti-Semitism. I don't personally believe it's on the rise, that wow, we've never seen anything like it, because I've seen way worse and experienced way worse. Um, and there is the Israeli government, not helping matters. There's a saying that is it in Jewish circles, is it good for the Jews or is it bad for the Jews? Like, oh, it's good for the Jews. Oh, it's bad for the Jews. The Jews, this monolithic, and is Netanyahu good for the Jews? No, I think he's bad for the Jews. So, what's the non-Jewish community supposed to do? Um, you're never going to win in a conversation about anti-Semitism with a Jewish person. I don't win in a conversation with anti-Semitism with a Jewish person. Um, there's always the talk about Israel, and you know, can you separate anti-Israelism from anti-Semitism? I don't know. Like I do. I think there's many problems with Israel, particularly today. And I'm anti-Israel and I'm anti-Netanyahu government, but I'm certainly not anti-Semitic. I think, you know, there's a place for everybody in the world. Um, but it's important to understand that the American Jewish psyche, which outside of Israel, the largest Jewish population, has been cultivated um, since the Six Day War, 1968 or 1969. Since the Six Day War, has been cultivated to view Israel as more righteous, more correct, a light unto the nations, and the homeland of the Jews, whatever that means. I mean, my homeland's in Philadelphia. It's like, what does this mean? Um, there's a fair number of Jews that were born in Brooklyn, New York, that have moved to the West Bank, that are settlers in the West Bank, probably a quarter of the 650,000 population, who are claiming that they're living in their homeland, but their homeland is Flatbush. It's not in the West Bank. So, when you see things like that, it's really head scratching. So, it's almost like therapy to talk about this with you guys, because I think about these things all the time, and I think that you know I can't discuss them with fellow Jews without getting into an argument. And it's really hard to argue with someone who knows a quarter of the facts that you do, about about Israel because it's always about Israel. It's always about Israel. It's like, okay, but let's take Israel out of the equation. You can't because Israel is Jews and Jews are Israel. And it's like, well, why do you live in the United States? Well, we're going to move to Israel when the Holocaust comes to the United States. It's like, okay. So, love to take some questions or observations. Um, it's a deep topic that I'm happy to talk about, and you know, it really surfaced after October 7th. So, let's have at it.
All right. Well, Harvey, thank you for that perspective. I've learned a lot, and I think there's a lot more to learn as we kind of share perspectives and questions and experiences. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.